Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the chilling and mysterious side of the nursing profession. Nurses, as you know, live on the front lines, standing between life and death daily. But occasionally, they witness things that defy explanation, experiences that linger in the shadowy realms beyond science and medicine. These are real stories from nurses who've encountered the unexplainable during late-night shifts, in hospital rooms, and in the final moments of life. So sit back, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for some spine-tingling tales from the supernatural side of healthcare. Let's begin. Story 1: The Mother's Ominous Choice. I work in the labor and delivery department on the 3rd floor of a hospital. Directly below us, on the 2nd floor, is the ICU. One day, a 47-year-old pregnant woman named Joanne was admitted to our unit. From the moment she arrived, she seemed deeply troubled, never smiling, barely speaking. When I asked for her name, it took her several tries to respond. "Joanne," she finally said, her voice distant and heavy. Joanne refused to lie down in the bed, preferring instead to sleep upright in a chair. Her eyes were sunken, with dark circles suggesting she hadn't rested in days. Something about her demeanor felt off, and I worried not just for her health, but for her babies as well. As I reviewed her medical history, it mentioned paranoia, depression, and hallucinations. This added to my concern. I let her know I'd be back shortly to start her IV. Joanne asked me what it was for, and after I explained that it would deliver her medication, she simply nodded. When I returned, Joanne was sitting with her head down, her hair covering her face, lightly snoring. I gently woke her and prepared to start the IV. As I inserted the needle, she suddenly whispered, "This hospital is a gateway between life and death. Below us, people die. Here, people are born." Her words sent chills down my spine. Once I finished the IV, Joanne lifted her head and asked a startling question: "If it's between me and my baby, who would you save?" Stunned, I asked why she wanted to know. Her voice turned sharp and urgent as she repeated, "You have to choose. Who would you save?" Her intensity was unnerving, almost otherworldly. I stammered, "I don't feel comfortable answering that." She stood up abruptly, her gaze piercing. "You must choose," she demanded. Pressed by her persistence, I finally said, "The baby." Joanne laughed a chilling, hollow sound. Pointing to herself, she said with eerie certainty, "Then this woman will die." Shaken, I immediately reported the incident to my manager. My boss went to speak with Joanne and returned shaking his head. "She's not well," he muttered. At 6 p.m., the doctor arrived, and Joanne was taken to the delivery room. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl, but soon after, she began hemorrhaging severely. Despite the surgical team's best efforts, Joanne was sent to the ICU, where she passed away later that night. Her toxicology report came back clean: no drugs, no substances to explain her erratic behavior. I couldn't shake her haunting words, "Since you chose the baby, this woman will die." Was she predicting her own death? Or was something darker at play? To this day, I wonder if Joanne was battling more than mental illness, if something else had taken hold of her. Story 2: The Silent Warning. I work in an old nursing facility that has a grim history. Originally built to house tuberculosis patients, the building later became a children's hospital before transforming into its current state as a care center for the sick and elderly. Over the years, both staff and patients have reported hearing and seeing children in the hallways, especially late at night when most of the lights are dimmed. Having worked here for 13 years, I've noticed a chilling pattern. Between December and January, the sounds of children fade: no laughter, no playful footsteps. And during this quiet period, deaths among patients seem to spike. One January, a man was admitted after knee surgery for physical therapy. He was placed in room 7. Almost immediately, he began complaining about a tall, shadowy girl with long fingernails who would pinch him during the night. He begged to be moved to another room, but we were fully booked. To ease his fear, we left his door open, kept the hallway light on, and even left his room light on, but the complaints continued. By the 4th night, he stopped mentioning the figure entirely. At midnight, my CNA went to check on him and found him unresponsive, his eyes wide open, foam at his mouth. As we attempted to assist him, I noticed nickel-sized bruises scattered across his body, eerily resembling pinch marks. The ambulance arrived, but he passed away weeks later from unrelated complications. Investigators ruled out abuse after finding fragments of his own skin under his nails, suggesting he had inflicted the injuries himself. Still, I wonder, why does the absence of the children's laughter always seem to signal more deaths? Could it be that the children are hiding from something more sinister during that time? Story 3: The Tiger Spirit. In 1994, I was a home health nurse, primarily working with Hmong families adjusting to life in the US. One case I'll never forget involved an elderly woman who had a wound on her lower back. When I arrived at her home, I noticed straw dolls hanging on the door, traditional symbols used to ward off evil spirits. The woman welcomed me in, explaining that she was alone, as her family was out. Thin and frail, her wrists were bound with red strings for spiritual protection. She warned me that her late husband, who had died in Southeast Asia, had returned as a tiger spirit and was trying to take her with him. She told me she'd grown a tail as a result. When she lay down so I could examine her wound, I realized she was referring to her protruding tailbone, a result of prolonged immobility. As I dressed the wound, I reassured her, explaining the human anatomy. She listened quietly, but as I packed up to leave, she whispered, "He won't stop until I'm with him." 2 weeks later, I learned that she had passed away in her sleep. I couldn't help but wonder, was her husband truly haunting her, or were her fears a manifestation of deep-seated cultural beliefs? These are just a few of the many chilling tales from nurses who've stood on the edge of the unexplained. Whether these events are supernatural or psychological, one thing is certain: the world of nursing holds more mysteries than we can comprehend. Stay tuned for more stories that will leave you questioning what lies beyond the veil of life and death. The strangest patient stories you'll ever hear. It all started during a routine house visit. My patient, an elderly grandmother, was frail and needed daily care. I was explaining how prolonged immobility could cause wounds when we both froze. Loud, heavy footsteps echoed from the attic above us. Someone or something was up there. I looked at her, expecting panic, but she just tapped my wrist gently and whispered, "You can hear that, huh? Just ignore it." Confused, I asked what she meant. She sighed, leaned in, and said, "When my family isn't home, my husband comes as a tiger and stays in the attic. He walks around up there all day. If you can hear him, just pretend you can't." I couldn't believe my ears. My years of medical training evaporated as my brain tried to make sense of what she'd just said. The heavy thudding above continued, and for a moment I thought about checking it out. But she reassured me, "Don't worry. He's harmless. He's always followed me every house we've lived in. We hear those steps. Go on, finish your rounds." I left reluctantly, visiting her weekly for months until she passed away. That encounter remains one of the strangest of my nursing career. A friend called Officer Paul. Nursing can harden you. Over time, you learn to detach, leaving your emotions at the door. But some stories follow you home no matter how hard you try. One night, I was assigned to a young patient named Sam. He was only 28, but years of alcohol and drug abuse had wrecked his body. His liver, kidneys, and heart were failing, leaving him bedridden. Sam had lost everything: his job, his wife, and custody of his kids. Now, he lived with his father, who kept him from being homeless. That night, Sam was my sole patient. We started continuous renal replacement therapy, a slow form of dialysis. While he lay in bed watching TV, we talked. He opened up about his life, how much he missed his kids, and the crushing guilt he felt after his friend died. Sam had once been a police officer. One fateful day, he traded shifts with a colleague. That colleague died in the line of duty. Ever since, Sam drowned his guilt in alcohol, pushing away everyone who loved him. Around 11 p.m., Sam fell asleep. His father stopped by after work, and we talked outside. He told me more about Sam's struggles and how he refused help, choosing instead to drink himself into oblivion. Over 3 nights, I got to know Sam well. But on the 3rd night, his condition deteriorated rapidly. At 3 a.m., he passed away during dialysis. After preparing his body for the morgue, I was given the rest of the night off. On my way home, I couldn't stop thinking about Sam. I didn't want to bring my sadness home to my wife and child, so I pulled over near a canal. Fishing had always helped me clear my head. I grabbed my rod and sat by the water, hoping for a moment of peace. It was 4 a.m. when a police car pulled up behind me. A young officer stepped out and introduced himself as Paul. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was just decompressing. We chatted for a while. Paul told me his grandfather had helped build the canal and gave me tips for better fishing bait. Before he left, he thanked me for taking care of people and shook my hand. But as I watched him walk back, something felt off. His car wasn't there anymore. I hadn't heard him drive away, and yet he was gone. Shaken, I packed up and headed home. The next day, Sam's father called, asking me to retrieve Sam's laptop from his hospital room. When he arrived to pick it up, I offered my condolences and asked about Sam's late friend. His father replied. His name was Paul. Officer Paul. A chill ran down my spine. The cost of family. Ever since my brother Che moved in with my mother and me, life had become complicated. At 38, Che was divorced, overweight, diabetic, and had high blood pressure. He spent his days drinking beer and playing video games. My mother, ever the caretaker, insisted we include him in our life insurance policy. The premium skyrocketed because of his health issues. I worked tirelessly at the hospital, watching people with conditions like Che's succumb to the virus in 2020. I tried to shield him, taking every precaution to avoid bringing the virus home. But he didn't make it easy. One day, despite all my efforts, I tested positive. My manager told me to isolate for 2 weeks. I confined myself to my room, staying far away from my mother and brother. But one night, feverish and coughing, I heard Che outside my door. He wanted to check on me. As much as I wanted to yell at him to go away, I realized something. Despite his flaws, Che cared. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to start caring for myself as much as I cared for others. It was impossible to sleep. The clock showed 2 a.m., and I wondered if Che was still awake, glued to his screen, gaming online as usual. I got out of my room, grabbed 2 beer bottles, and headed to his room. Sure enough, he was up. I plopped down on his bed, handed him a beer, and we spent the next couple of hours playing Street Fighter online. It was a good distraction, and for a moment it felt like we were kids again. But I couldn't stop coughing. My chest felt heavy, my throat raw. After a couple of hours, I took some Benadryl to help ease the symptoms and said goodnight to Che before retreating to my room. 4 days later, things took a turn for the worse. Che began coughing violently. Even simple things like brushing his teeth left him gasping for air. Alarmed, we rushed him to the hospital. It's been 2 years now. My mom and I have been surviving, bolstered by the $180,000 from the life insurance. It helps, but it doesn't replace him. I still miss Che. He was my only brother, and despite everything, we loved him deeply. The pandemic claimed so much from us, and for our family, Che was one of its victims. Fast forward to 2023. It was New Year's Eve, and I was at a friend's party. We celebrated the countdown with cheers and beers, one for each chime of the clock striking midnight. By 2 a.m., the crowd had thinned, and our host insisted we stay the night to avoid driving under the influence. But I wasn't having it. I felt just buzzed enough to think I could handle the drive home. Big mistake. As I hit the highway ramp, something felt off. Instead of merging with traffic, I found myself on a curving road, except it wasn't a curve. I was driving against oncoming traffic. The realization didn't hit me right away, even as a few cars sped past, their high beams flashing in warning. Some drivers swerved wildly, honking at me. I was too foggy to process what was happening. Then, out of nowhere, a blue car pulled alongside mine. Its interior light was on, and the driver looked straight at me. He matched my speed, then slowed down, only to catch up again moments later. Each time, he smiled at me, an eerie, knowing smile. That's when it hit me. It was Che. My breath caught. As he fell back one last time, I snapped out of my daze. My focus sharpened, and that's when I saw them, 2 massive trucks barreling toward me from both lanes, horns blaring. Panicked, I swerved hard to the left. My car skidded off the road, up onto the train tracks. Gravel flew in every direction as I slammed the brakes, heart hammering in my chest. The car finally stopped. Shaking, I took a deep breath and tried to collect myself. I reversed off the tracks, turned around, and sat there for a moment, the weight of what just happened sinking in. I knew I'd been reckless. Driving drunk was the kind of mistake that could ruin lives, including my own. If I had been caught, I might have lost my job or worse. Somehow I made it home without incident. The streets were busy with New Year's revelers and patrol cars, but I got lucky. When I walked through the door, I collapsed on the couch and passed out, too drained to even dream. The next night, however, was a different story. I dreamt of Che. He came to me, looking just as he did when he was alive. Calm but firm. He told me he was leaving for good this time, but not before he made sure I was okay. He said he'd been watching out for me that night on the highway, guiding me away from disaster. "Take care of yourself," he told me, his voice gentle but insistent. "You're the youngest. Mom needs you." I woke up sobbing, the emotions I'd been holding back flooding to the surface. Guilt has weighed on me ever since. I can't stop replaying that night in my head, wishing I'd made a different choice. But Che's words stay with me, a reminder that I have a responsibility to do better for myself, for my mom, and for his memory. That's it for this story. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. Your support means everything. Take care, and whether it's day or night where you are, I hope it's a good one.